humblemud.
The 2026 Steam Next Fest just wrapped up, and while I've vowed not to buy any new games this year so that I can focus on my backlog, that doesn't mean I'm not supporting indies. Some incredible developers sent codes my way, and I also sought out a few demos that caught my attention. Unfortunately, I'm afraid that many of these are going to go under people's radars, so let's change that. We've got a lot to cover today, so if you're new here, please consider subscribing, and let's jump right into it. The first game I want to talk about is the one that you likely saw in the thumbnail, and that's Vital Shell. From the moment the developer brought it to my attention, I was hooked. Visually, this is straight up PlayStation 1, Sega Saturn, early Dreamcast era graphics right here, and it's all the better for it. That slightly rough, stylized 3D look with the contrast between bold and muted colors, the menu aesthetics, and that pre-renderware era enemy design, it's heaven for me. Speaking of heaven, mechanically, this is what's known as a bullet heaven game. Instead of dodging endless enemy barrages like a bullet hell, you are the one flooding the screen with attacks. You start off with just a little pea shooter, but by the end of the run, you become an absolute force of nature. It follows that clean and likely familiar wave-based structure, 20 waves per round, which culminates in a boss fight against a compromised mech. And if you beat that mech, you unlock it as a playable character for future runs. This makes for such a satisfying progression loop, especially when you factor in the character unlocks with the fact that you can also unlock permanent upgrades in between runs, and there are a variety of ways to build your mechs, so there's always something tangible to work towards every single time. But above all else, the real highlight for me here is that aesthetic that I just can't stop mentioning. It's not just visual aesthetics that are strong. While I can't use the tracks in my video due to copyright, just know that this game features extremely catchy and flow-inducing jungle, drum and bass, and trance tracks that'll take you right back to late 90s and early 2000s gaming in the best way possible. It's vibey, it's stylish, but most of all, it feels intentional. The art direction, the UI, the weapon effects, everything feels cohesive. The upgrades and level ups are paced beautifully, the mechs themselves have a lot of personality. For example, the first playable mech fills that sort of tank warrior archetype, slow and strong and bulky. Another leans more into that ranger type of role with really quick and precise attacks. The Mirage mech draws clear parallels to a high DPS but fragile wizard archetype. Now, I won't spoil all of them, but you get the idea. Even though this is a psychedelic sci-fi mech shooter, I really think RPG fans are going to appreciate those recognizable roles that these mechs fall into. And while it is chaotic and fast-paced, it's also become one of my late-night comfort games. In my opinion, Vital Shell deserves to be in the same conversation as other favorites from the genre like Vampire Survivors or Halls of Torment. It's no wonder it's trending overwhelmingly positive on Steam right now. Now let's keep that arcade shooting action strong with Astro Fighters 2. This is obviously the sequel to Astro Fighters, which was a shmup developed by a single developer that has gained a small cult following. Now, I'll be honest, at first I didn't know if I liked this game. This is mostly because of the lack of visibility combined with the fast-paced nature that can admittedly feel quite overwhelming at times. There are these bright bloom effects on all of the projectiles, and sometimes overhanging environmental elements will temporarily block your vision. It can feel chaotic in a way that borders on unfair the first time that you play this game. But my recommendation to you, if you give it a shot and feel the same way that I did, is to just stick with it. The more I played, the more I realized that there's some real depth to Astro Fighters 2. Your ship is incredibly snappy, which I do appreciate, but it can almost feel too fast at first, especially in those boss fights when they're just spraying the place down with bullets. Thankfully, you have a brake button that lets you slow down and weave carefully around all of those bullet patterns, and if it gets to be too much, your bomb can clear all of the projectiles on screen anyway. It's also important to note that your ship naturally slows down when it's shooting, regardless of which ship you choose, so this isn't a game where you just want to hold the fire button down mindlessly. This one mechanic subtly teaches you to scan the environment and fire when it's actually the right time instead. And encouraging you to scan the environment like this is extremely important because enemies can attack you from either side of the screen and from off screen. Thankfully, you can switch your firing direction to shoot behind you if you need, which completely changes how you approach positioning. Since enemies attack from both directions, you're not hugging one side of the screen like you do in 90% of other shooters. In Astro Fighters 2, the middle middle is often the safest place, even though you're never going to quite feel safe. And while the enemies attacking me from off-screen did feel a little cheap at first, I started combating this by yet again paying attention to the environment. Notice how the shadows that the enemies cast appear on the ground before the enemies themselves appear on screen? That's your indication of where the next wave of enemies are coming from. Internalize all of this and then the game will click. Now, that doesn't mean it just suddenly becomes easy. It can still be pretty brutal to get through a level unscathed, but that constant push-pull tension, that sense of danger, that sense of speed, that's what you want in a good shmup, and that's what makes Astro Fighters 2 exciting. And it's also worth mentioning that the game's soundtrack leans more into rock and metal actually, as opposed to the electronic music that permeates the genre. And that really contributes to giving this game a sort of Lords of Thunder vibe that I didn't expect. If you're looking for an old school shooter that adds a couple new school twists, Astro Fighters 2 is worth giving a shot. Or maybe a couple hundred. Okay, after all that fast arcade shmup energy, we're gonna slow things down for a moment with two narrative titles, but don't worry, we'll pick it right back up with some killer RPGs in a bit. For now though, I've got to talk about Book Smugglers. Now, I'll admit, when the devs sent this over to me, the title did not grab me immediately. It felt a little generic, honestly. But once you understand the title's significance, it makes a lot more sense. The story draws from real events in 19th century Lithuanian history, during a time where Russia attempted to suppress Lithuanian culture by banning books and even restricting them from speaking their native language. During that time, knygnesis, literally translated as the ones who carry books, secretly distributed literature along the countryside to help keep the culture alive. Despite persecution, beatings, and actual book burnings, literacy remained high and Lithuanian culture endured. It's an incredibly inspiring, real-life tale that I honestly didn't know a whole lot about until I started playing this game. And learning all of this context hit me in a similar way to games like Disco Elysium or Velvet Assassin have. It really deepens the entire experience and makes you want to go read more about those events after your play sessions. Gameplay-wise, this is essentially a choose-your-own-adventure style storybook experience. And while the presentation isn't the flashiest thing you're ever going to see, once you settle into it, I do think this game looks quite cozy. The real strength here, though, is the storytelling and the tension between every decision that you're going to make. There is never an easy choice. Sometimes you make what feels like the right call and it still goes sideways, which honestly mirrors real life in a lot of ways. I also really enjoy how every time you return to the bar, which acts as sort of your hub, new characters appear that deepen the story and offer new equipment for your next outing. So you'll find yourself entering this familiar loop of preparing, planning, and then stepping back into uncertainty. And I recognize that this game isn't going to resonate with everyone. It's slower, it's text heavy, it has some puzzles that are going to make you think, but for me, it was incredibly interesting and I genuinely found myself wanting more after the demo ended. Now, this next narrative adventure, The Tides of Blazefall, it was an interesting experience for me, and honestly, a different kind of interesting than the others on this list. This one was sent over to me by Awakened Realms, the same team behind Tainted Grail: The Fall of Avalon, which, if you remember, was one of my favorite games that I played in 2025. And when they pitched it to me, they mentioned influences like Disco Elysium and Citizen Sleeper, but set in a pirate setting with traditional sailing mechanics and turn-based, card-based ship battling. So on paper, this sounded like it was built in a lab for me, and this is also coming from the same team who made Tainted Grail, which was an absolute banger. Once I jumped into the demo, however, I did notice a few things that held it back for me. I ran into a handful of typos. Normally, I can forgive that pretty easily, but in a text-heavy, narrative-focused experience, it did stand out. The other thing, and this is trickier to articulate unless you've played Disco Elysium, is that some of the influence from that game feels a little too on the nose. The main character has different masks that speak to him internally, functioning very similarly to the skilled personalities in Disco. It's not bad, but it does feel very familiar. Additionally, the character portraits and the way that the text flow screams Disco Elysium. That said, there is real potential here. The ship-based combat is genuinely fun once you understand how to position your ship and sequence your attacks while anticipating your enemies. Sailing itself is a joy. I love just going around in this world. And And speaking of the world building, learning a bit about what the Blazefall itself even is and the pale that infects the people of this world, even in my short time with the demo, I was intrigued. I'm not fully invested in the characters yet, but again, this was just a demo, so my takeaway, this is one to keep an eye on. If the setting grabs you, that pirate aesthetic with a Disco Elysium flair sounds interesting, I'd recommend wishlisting it and watching how it develops. If they can manage to tighten up some of those rough edges and refine the narrative voice a bit more, this could turn into something really special, and honestly, if anyone can do it, it's Awaken Realms. Now, I promised you guys some more pure RPGs, here they are. Underkeep is the kind of game that just puts a smile on my face before I even start talking about it. This is a glorious first-person dungeon crawling RPG developed by Rake and Grass, a tiny team of only 3 people. And let me tell you what I love about this thing. The music, fantastic. Pixel art, gorgeous. The character designs are charming and funny. The minimap is clean and readable. The writing feels tight and appropriate to the fantasy world that our characters live in. And somehow, unexpectedly, it's genuinely hilarious at parts. Like, I actually laughed out loud around midnight when I was playing this game. Also, it's worth noting that out of all the games on this list, this one has the tightest demo. You can finish it in about 30 minutes, and in that time, you will know if this game is right for you or not. Right from the jump, you design your party. Now, I went with 2 warriors and 2 wizards. One was more of a buff-focused support role, and the other leaning into that traditional high DPS spellcasting. And truthfully, the only real critique I have about this game is a really nitpicky one in regards to this character creation piece. It sounds stupid, but I wish you could type your own names for your characters. As far as I could tell, you can only cycle through preset names instead of entering your own. I really wanted to name my dwarf something really fitting like Gimli or Stinky. You know how we do around here. But honestly, if that's my biggest complaint, we're off to a great start, and spoiler alert, it is my biggest complaint. Like any good adventure, you start with a small quest. In this case, you're simply gathering 5 mushrooms for the locals. That leads you into a cave, into combat encounters, into little environmental challenges, and before long, you encounter a living, breathing, sentient fungus who warns you that you are stealing its children. And suddenly, your simple mushroom fetch quest becomes your first real moral choice of the game. Do you bring the mushrooms back to your people for a hearty stew, or do you return them to this being who promises you no harm and a reward if you just simply give it back its children? Now, I won't spoil what the outcomes of these choices are here. Just download the demo, get to that moment, save beforehand, and see both endings. It's worth it, I promise. Underkeep immediately manages to feel like a classic, to feel authentic to the dungeon crawling genre that it's based in, while still doing something playful, deep, and memorable with it, pushing it beyond the tropes. Rake and Grass, if you're watching this, I would love to play this thing all the way through. Now, if first-person dungeon crawling is not really your thing, maybe you'll enjoy the more traditional roguelike dungeon crawling of Alchemist Alcove. Fun fact for you guys, Alchemist Alcove just released today at the time of this video's release, so if you like the look of this, maybe consider picking it up. Tell them Humble sent you. This one was developed by a team of just 2 people, and it was described to me as an intense, traditional roguelike RPG where you craft spells and tools using the remains of your fallen enemies. You have to use only the elements around you to survive and eventually carve out your freedom. The dev also told me that one of their core goals was to make something challenging but fun, something that could resonate with veterans of the genre and those new to the genre. And speaking from the perspective of someone who's admittedly not incredibly verbose in roguelikes, I honestly think they pulled it off. Visually, it's simple but effective. The pixel art fits the tone perfectly, and the music is phenomenal. I really can't overstate how good the music is. When enemies are present in a room, there's this sinister layer underneath the track that creates tension, and then the moment you clear the room, all of that tension lifts. Early on, there are plenty of moments where you just barely seem to scrape by. You take more damage than you expected, you realize you miscalculated a move, you may even feel like there aren't enough resources around to sustain you. But just keep in mind, if you start to get discouraged, that the real leveling up you do here isn't in gold, gear, or experience. It's knowledge that you gain as a player. On the normal recommended difficulty, the recipes you learn persist after death. Once you discover how to craft something, that knowledge carries forward, even into your next life. So, though you they die, you're not starting back at square one. Above all else though, as you can imagine, crafting and discovering new things is where this game really shines. There was one moment in particular that keeps coming back to me. I was almost dead, I had very little health left. All I had after the last battle I was in was salted meat, but no fire to cook it with, and so I couldn't eat it. I felt for sure that the next room was going to be my last. I decided not to rush headfirst into death and instead go back to some of the rooms I had previously explored, and accidentally picked up another piece of salt, and I noticed that I could combine it with the already salted meat that I had, which wasn't what I expected, so I thought, alright, let's see what happens. And then that turned it into jerky. Suddenly, I had something I could eat without having to cook it. 4 hit points granted, enough to survive a couple more encounters. That kind of accidental discovery feels incredible, and it's all over the place in this game, these little micro victories. These little things add up and suddenly you feel not so naked and afraid. Of course, the spells are also a blast once you start unlocking those as well. Holding enemies behind a bubble shield while you reposition, devastating a room with a powerful ice spell, it rules. Once it starts clicking, you may find yourself addicted. Last, and certainly not least, is something completely different from everything else I've talked about today, and this one is light, goofy, and honestly just plain fun. The game is called Diggin, and while that might sound like a generic name at first, it's actually perfect for a silly little game like this. It opens with a surprisingly serious premise. Some kind of meteor crash completely wipes out a society of star-nosed moles, and now it's up to you to dig down and see what or who might still be down there. But once you actually start playing the game, the tone immediately shifts into something extremely chill and self-aware. The music is laid back and relaxing, the sound design is cozy, reminiscent of Stardew Valley, and honestly, at the end of the day, you're just this tiny mole, you're just this little guy. You've got an automatic drill going deeper and deeper underground. You'll eventually run out of fuel, so when you surface, you use the resources that you collected in that previous run to upgrade for the next run. By the end of the demo, you're drilling faster and harder, tossing dynamite around, spotting fuel stones mid-descent to help keep your engine going, and just gradually pushing deeper each time and discovering new things. At its core, this is an idle clicker game, technically. It's what I like to call a coffee break game. This is a game you can play with just one hand, but I don't mean that like the games that plague the Switch eShop. No. This is a chill, mouse-guided adventure that, while ridiculously simple, makes you want to stay. I enjoyed Diggin way more than I expected to, but with that said, I do hope there's something more waiting beneath the surface, beyond what I excavated in the demo. If the full version eventually reveals some meaningful story beats that tie back to that opening premise once you reach a certain depth, that could really elevate this whole thing. And honestly, if it's truly just digging endlessly, well, at least it's fun. But of course, I'm hoping that there's something down there that's promising. All the signs point to that being the case, thankfully. Either way, Diggin knows exactly what it is. It's just digging, and sometimes that's all you need. I hope you guys enjoyed these recommendations and found something you'd like to add to your wish list here. If you're still here, thanks so much for watching, and as always, stay humble.